Okay. So before I get into what you guys were talking about in your group, you guys should keep in mind that this is a very complicated question, more than even the things that we've been talked about. And I know we've gone into a lot of detail on this topic, but there's even more details to consider when you think about this question: who should be king, Henry VI or Edward IV? Here's another little piece of the puzzle that we could talk about briefly, and we should talk about it because we're about to lose this piece of the puzzle because he's going to get killed today in class. It's this man right here. This man is named Edward of Westminster, or Edward, Prince of Wales. Prince of Wales is the title given to the person who is next in line to be king. Edward, Prince of Wales, or Edward of Westminster, is the son of Henry VI and Margaret of Anjou. So if the Lancasters keep power and Henry VI is king, when Henry VI dies, this boy would be next in line. At the time, he's about 17 years old when we are here in 1470, 1471. There's some descriptions of this boy that are a little bit worrying, like the ones on the left. He was seen as kind of being hard-headed, stubborn, violent. He was insulting to the people around him, not very respectful to the people around him as well. And a lot of people at the time seem to have been worried about what would happen if and when this young boy ever grew up and became king once his father died. So there's lots of little things to consider here, because when you put somebody in charge, you also have to consider who's going to come after them. If Henry VI stays king, he only has one heir, this boy Edward, Edward of Westminster, which of course makes it confusing because, of course, Edward IV also has heirs at this point, and his oldest son is also named Edward, which makes it even worse, the future Edward V, who seems to be a much more right-minded, kind, and has a much better perspective to be a better king later. So when you're looking at who should be king, if you're talking about who would be better for the country, you don't want to just look at who is king now, but who will be king after they die. For now, I want to go back to the conversations I heard in your group. Let's start with Dangmo. Dangmo, what did you guys talk about over there? Who did you think should be king and why?
We said Edward should be king because he has he is better at ruling than Henry, and he didn't marry for power; he married for love. And
did you guys like that he married for love, or did you think that that was a mistake?
We liked it.
Okay.
That's it.
But Jay, I heard you actually making some arguments in favor of Henry VI. What were you guys talking about?
We were just discussing um we're unsure about who should be king, but we're just listing down what are the pros of each one of them. And I also mentioned that maybe if Henry VI was back in line, it might solve some problems, since well, he can be easy to control, I guess, and that might not be bad or good. But and he was used to be king, so if he went back, that would probably put things back in place. But I am I think it should be Edward VI, mainly because he's a better king than Henry VI, and that um he was supposed to be the king, I guess, because his line was in front of Henry's.
Yeah, and we've talked about that. The family tree argument is so weird that you really can make a good argument for both. And as long as you allow it to go through the female line, like we talked about before, Edward IV could actually make an argument for being in front of Henry VI legitimately, and that the House of York, not the House of Lancaster, should be in charge. And I think we're all on board with this. I don't think anybody here at this point really disagrees that Edward IV is a better king than Henry VI. However, Edward IV did make what some might say, even though Dangmo and Judy liked it, he made a mistake in marrying Elizabeth Woodville and marrying for love instead of power, which really set him at odds with his biggest supporters, like the Kingmaker and like his brother George. However, on the other hand, by getting rid of Henry VI, we're once again creating a problem. We're setting an example. What is the example that we're setting by getting rid of Henry VI, guys? What do you think, Judy? By getting rid of Henry VI, what example is being set that might be followed in the future?
So if there's a weak king, you're gonna get rid of him, no
Right.
matter if he's in line or not. If he's should he be the next king or not?
Right. And we keep seeing this, like we had it before with Henry IV, for example, even a long time ago with Edward II. And if we keep following this example, then those rules we talked about for who's next to be king kind of go away. And this sets the stage for possible future conflicts or future civil wars if they stop continuing to follow the rules for who should next be king. And so there's an upside and downside to both. Edward might be the better king, but by getting rid of Henry VI, that could be setting the example for someone else to get rid of somebody else later on, which would lead to more fighting, more war, more bloodshed, and more instability in England. Questions before we go on? Once again, our essential question today, how did Edward IV regain the throne and destroy the House of Lancaster? It should be in your notes from last class. Henry VI has the throne back with the help of the Kingmaker, but he's not going to keep it very long. Raise your hand if you are not ready to go on. Welcome, Jesse. You didn't miss too much. You missed an activity and some review. You should have it in your notes from last class. Anything that you need, I'll post into the WeChat group. When you're ready, have your camera on and be ready to go. If you'll notice in the WeChat group, for those of you having fun with the Wars of the Roses, I gave you a crossword puzzle and a word find that you can have fun with and complete if you have time and if you'd like to do it. The crossword puzzle will test your knowledge as we've learned it in class. Henry VI was king again, but he only stayed in power for about 6 months. Edward IV had fled to Europe, leaving behind his wife and his children hiding in Westminster Abbey under the protection of sanctuary. Remember, if you're in a church, no one's supposed to come and take you out and do harm to you. So his wife, Elizabeth Woodville, and their children should be okay for now. Edward is gathering his supporters and gathering an army, and just a half a year later returns to England, where the Yorks start to take back everything. First, the Battle of Barnet. The Battle of Barnet, the most important thing that you guys need to know that happened there is the Kingmaker is killed. There was fog. He was fired upon possibly even by his own troops. And now the Kingmaker, the person who had gotten rid of Henry VI, given power to Edward IV, given power back to Henry VI and gotten rid of Edward IV, has now been killed by the forces of his original ally, Edward IV. And so the Kingmaker is dead. With the Kingmaker being dead, Edward IV is able to retake the throne. For the second time, third time actually, he finds his brother George. George, of course, is scared that there's probably no way he's getting away with this one. Edward once again forgives his brother. It was a mistake because, number one, Elizabeth Woodville can never forgive George. Remember, George and Richard Neville, the Kingmaker, as part of 2 rebellions ago, had actually killed her father and brother. So Edward IV's wife is never going to forgive George no matter what. You can't forgive someone who's murdered your family. And of course, it ended up being a bad mistake. George would try once again to start spread rumors about his brother Edward. He actually spread the rumor that Edward IV and Elizabeth Woodville's marriage was illegitimate and said that Edward IV had already been married beforehand. That was a really dangerous thing to do because that would mean that if Edward was already married, when he and Elizabeth got married, it meant that their marriage was not valid, which would mean all of their children were not legitimate, which would mean none of them could ever be kings of England. For George trying to do this, which was obviously a play to take power for himself, because if all of Edward and Elizabeth's children are not legitimate, then power then goes to George. He's next in line as the brother of Edward. Of course, George got caught and executed. The story that we have written down a little bit after his death is that he actually got drowned to death in a big barrel of wine. So George would eventually meet his downfall anyway, just 7 years after this. But we're not quite there yet. So the Kingmaker's dead, Richard Neville. However, even though Edward's retaken the throne, it's just like it was the first time he took the throne. He doesn't actually win until he defeats the Lancaster army. And I mean the real Lancaster army that is really led not by Henry VI, but by the Queen, Margaret of Anjou. Once again, Edward's forces prevail. At the Battle of Tewkesbury, once again, just 1 month after the Kingmaker died, in May 1471, the forces of York and Edward IV prevail, Lancaster is defeated, and this time Edward is not merciful. He made the mistake before. Every single Lancastrian of any sense, of any worth at all, is killed either during the battle or after the battle. This includes the entire Beaufort family. This includes also the only child of Henry VI and Margaret of Anjou, the boy we saw in the previous slide, the young 17-year-old Edward of Westminster. The story we have about him is that he got executed with his head being cut off after the battle, not as part of the battle, and that it was done intentionally. Edward is finally realizing that sometimes a king cannot always do the things that make him feel good about himself. Sometimes he has to make the hard decisions. He cannot always forgive his enemies. The Lancasters have shown that if they're left alive, that they are going to continue to make issues. And so he gets rid of them. However, there's one Lancaster that was not fighting at the Battle of Tewkesbury. There's one Lancaster that wasn't part of the battle at all and was not there to be executed right after. Which Lancaster is still left? Not Margaret of Anjou, by the way. Margaret of Anjou is going to run away after this. What man Lancaster is still left alive, guys? Who knows?
Henry VI.
The king is still alive. And what do you do with Henry VI? This guy who has never been able to rule anyway. After winning at Tewkesbury, a couple weeks later, Edward returns triumphant yet again, regaining the throne that he originally stole in May 1471. He then goes to the Tower where Henry VI is being kept and greets him. And Henry VI, in true Henry VI fashion, says, "Hey, how are you doing, my cousin Edward? I'm so happy to see you. I know since you're here, cousin, I am going to be very safe." Henry VI died that night. Critical thinking activity. Question number 1. Why do you think Henry VI said this when he saw his cousin? Why did Henry VI say, "My cousin of York, you are very welcome. I know that in your hands my life will not be in danger"? And question 2, why do you think he was killed? And he was definitely killed. You could also tell me who you think killed him or who gave the order as well. Any questions?